She thought she was just returning a lost wallet. A waitress, broke and exhausted, calling the number on a sleek black card left behind by a stranger in a suit. But when the line connected, the voice that answered wasn't grateful. It was commanding, sharp, and cold enough to stop her breath. "Miss Robinson, you have something that belongs to me." That was the moment Tammy realized this wasn't about honesty. It was about control. Every word she spoke felt like walking a tightrope over fire. One lie, one hesitation, and she knew she wouldn't just lose the job she hated, she'd lose everything. Because this man didn't lose his wallet by accident. He left it for her, to see if she was worthy of surviving his world. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let's begin. Rain hammered against the windows of Vince's 24-hour diner like it was trying to break through. Tammy Robinson wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, her reflection ghosting across the rain-streaked glass. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, the kind of exhaustion that lived in your bones. 24 years old and already feeling ancient. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and grease, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she was alone. The last customer had left an hour ago, a trucker who'd tipped in quarters. Tammy pocketed them without counting. Every coin mattered when you were 3 weeks behind on rent and juggling community college nursing classes with double shifts that hollowed you out from the inside. Her anatomy textbook sat open beside the register, pages worn from highlighting and rereading. She'd been studying the cardiovascular system between refills, trying to memorize valve functions while her own heart felt like it might give out from exhaustion. This was her life. Coffee-stained scrubs, overdue tuition notices, and dreams that felt further away with every passing semester. Then the door opened, and everything changed. He moved like silence had a body. The man who entered wore a black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Expensive fabric that didn't belong in a place where the vinyl booths were held together with duct tape. His dark hair was swept back, sharp cheekbones catching the dim light, and his eyes... God, his eyes were the color of winter storms. He didn't look around. Didn't acknowledge her greeting, just walked to booth 7 in the corner, the one with the best view of both the entrance and the back exit, and sat with the precision of someone who always knew where the exits were. Tammy grabbed her notepad, smoothing her apron with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. "Good evening. What can I get you?" "Espresso." His voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent. "Double shot, nothing else. No please, no thank you. Just command wrapped in civility." She nodded and retreated behind the counter, her pulse doing something strange in her throat. The espresso machine hissed and groaned, and she was painfully aware of his presence behind her. Still, watchful, radiating a kind of danger she couldn't name. When she brought the cup, he didn't look at her. Just wrapped long fingers around the ceramic and sipped once, his expression unreadable. He stayed for exactly 12 minutes. Then he stood, left a $50 bill for a $6 espresso, and walked out into the rain without a word. The bell above the door chimed softly as he disappeared into the storm. Tammy exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. That's when she saw it. The wallet sat in booth 7 like a trap disguised as opportunity. Black leather, impossibly smooth, the kind of quality that whispered wealth without needing to shout. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It was heavy, substantial, warm from where it had rested against him. She should have run after him, should have called out. But something made her open it first. Inside, stacks of crisp $100 bills, bound neatly. 10, 15, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. A silver money clip engraved with Italian words she couldn't read. A black metal card with no bank logo, no name, just a phone number embossed in silver. And an ID. Marcello Ossani. The photo showed the same winter storm eyes, the same sharp features. An address in Kenilworth. The kind of gated district where security didn't ask questions because everyone who mattered was already inside. Tammy's hands shook. This wasn't just money. This was freedom. Tuition paid. Rent covered. Textbooks, scrubs, the ability to sleep without wondering if she'd wake up homeless. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, soft but firm. There's no peace in taking what isn't yours, baby girl. You sleep better poor than dishonest. She'd been dead 3 years now. Cancer that they couldn't afford to fight properly. Tammy stared at the bills, at her own reflection in the diner window. Small, tired, drowning slowly in a life that didn't care how hard she worked. One choice, one moment. Everything could change. But her hands were already moving, already reaching for her phone, already dialing the number on the card before her brain could stop them. The call connected on the first ring. Speak. The voice was sharp, male, cold as January wind. Hi. Yes, Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. This is Tammy Robinson. I work at Vince's Diner on Halstead. Someone left a wallet here tonight. A Mr. Marcello Ossani? Silence. Heavy. Assessing. Then another voice cut through. Deeper, steadier, carved from stone and winter itself. This is Marcello. Her breath caught. You have my property, Miss Robinson. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered with the kind of authority that made her spine straighten instinctively. Yes, sir. You left it in booth 7. It has your ID and some cash. I just wanted to return it. You could have kept it. The words landed like a test she didn't know she was taking. You work nights at a diner, he continued, his tone unnervingly calm. I'm aware of what that pays. The amount in that wallet would solve many of your problems, Miss Robinson. Her stomach clenched. How did he know her financial situation? Had he been watching her before tonight? Maybe, she managed. But it's still yours. Another pause, the kind that felt like someone calculating your value in real time. Do not move. A driver will come for it. Yes, sir. She should have hung up. Should have ended the call and waited. But his voice came again, quieter now. Almost intimate. You didn't open it, did you? The lie burned her tongue. She'd opened it, counted the money with desperate eyes, imagined all the ways it could save her. No, sir. The words came out steady, strong. It's untouched. Good. A pause that felt like judgment being passed. Your honesty, or lack of it, will be evaluated. The line went dead. Tammy stood frozen, the dial tone humming like a warning. Outside, rain continued its assault on the windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of red and white. Her reflection stared back at her. A woman who'd just lied to a man whose voice alone promised consequences. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the glass, she had the distinct, chilling certainty that she was already being watched, that the wallet hadn't been lost. It had been left. And she'd just passed, or failed, a test she never knew existed. Rain whispered against the glass as the city outside blurred into ribbons of red and white light. Tammy Robinson stood motionless behind the counter, the phone still humming its ghostly dial tone, her reflection trembling in the window. The wallet lay there, perfectly still, black and gleaming, like it was breathing danger into the air. She didn't move for a long time. She couldn't. Somewhere deep down, beneath the thundering of her heart, she already knew. This wasn't over. The old clock above the coffee machine ticked past 2:20 a.m. The diner was empty now, chairs flipped, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to the air like old perfume. The rain outside had thickened into a sheet, hammering the windows in erratic bursts. Tammy locked the front door with trembling fingers and turned off the neon sign. The Vince's 24-hour diner glow faded to black, leaving her in a dim sea of streetlight and shadow. 15 minutes. That's what he'd said. 15 minutes until a driver arrives. The words replayed in her head, heavy as thunder. She tried to calm herself, wiping the counter, checking the register, busying her hands to silence the growing panic. Every sound became suspicious. The ticking clock, the wind against the vent, the distant rumble of an engine that could have been anyone's. She didn't even realize she was talking to herself until the words slipped out. "It's fine, Tammy. Just a driver, that's all. He'll take it and leave." Her voice cracked. The empty diner didn't believe her. When headlights finally cut through the rain, they weren't from some old taxi or delivery truck. They were low, sharp, and deliberate, the kind of lights that belonged to something expensive, foreign, and fast. A black sedan pulled up slowly, its engine purring with restrained power. No sirens, no horn, just silence and rain. Tammy's pulse quickened. The car idled there for a moment, as if studying her through the diner's front glass. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a long black coat that caught the rain like armor. The way he moved, precise, economical, sent a cold ripple down her spine. His presence filled the street without needing to speak. When he pushed open the diner door, the bell above it gave a weak, nervous jingle. He didn't wipe his feet, didn't look around, just stood there. "Miss Robinson?" His voice was deep, calm. Not unkind, but stripped of all warmth. She nodded, gripping the counter like it could anchor her. "Yes." He took a step closer, the overhead light glinting off the water droplets clinging to his coat. His face was angular, clean-shaven, with eyes that didn't blink often. Everything about him radiated control. "You have something for Mr. Osani." Not a question, a statement. Tammy swallowed hard and reached beneath the counter, her hand brushing the slick leather of the wallet. It felt heavier now, like it had absorbed her fear. She slid it across the counter. The man didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he studied her, eyes moving from her trembling hands to the fading bruise on her knuckle from work, to the small crucifix necklace she wore out of habit more than faith. Then slowly, he picked up the wallet. "Mr. R. Osani appreciates your honesty." That was it. No smile, no thank you, no gesture of reassurance. He turned to leave. Something inside her, curiosity, fear, desperation, made her blurt out, "Wait, did he say anything else?" The man paused, hand on the door handle. Then, without looking back, he reached into his coat pocket and placed a white envelope on the counter. "For you." He walked out before she could speak again. The door jingled softly as he stepped back into the rain. Tammy watched through the glass as the man got into the sedan. The engine hummed to life, and the car disappeared into the storm, swallowed whole by the wet night. Silence returned. The envelope sat there, innocent as a trap. She stared at it, unwilling to touch it. The last time she'd picked up something that wasn't hers, her world had started to unravel. But the human mind is built to crave answers, even when they're dangerous. She reached out. The paper was thick, expensive. Her name wasn't on it, no markings at all. Her heartbeat climbed as she peeled it open. Inside were two things: a stack of crisp $100 bills, 5,000, maybe more, and a single folded note written in black ink. "You passed. M.O." The words were perfectly centered, perfectly written, like a test grade signed by God himself. Tammy blinked, her mind rejecting what she saw. Past what? She checked again, half expecting more, a signature, an explanation, something human. But that was all. Money and mystery. The cash felt too real, too crisp against her fingertips. $5,000. That was tuition, rent, hope. She slammed the envelope shut. This wasn't a reward. It was a message. And messages came with strings. She stuffed the envelope inside her purse, locked the door again, and stood alone under the hum of the flickering diner lights. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. For a long time, she just stood there, staring at her reflection in the window, asking herself if this was the moment her life had truly started, or ended. By the time she made it home, the storm had grown heavier. Her small apartment sat on the third floor of a crumbling brick building overlooking an alley. She climbed the stairs with the envelope burning in her bag, every creak of the steps sounding too loud. Inside, the warmth didn't help. Her clothes clung to her, cold and damp. She dropped her bag on the counter, slid the envelope into the drawer, and stood staring at it like it might move on its own. Her phone buzzed once, a text from her roommate. "Can you cover rent tomorrow?" She stared at the screen until it dimmed out. The envelope called to her again, whispering solutions. She could use it. Pretend it was a miracle. Pretend Marcello Ossani didn't exist. Pretend she hadn't already heard the voice of a man who could end her life with a single command. But pretending didn't make the truth smaller. Tammy opened her curtains just enough to look outside. The rain still fell, thick and endless. The street below glistened with puddles. That's when she saw it. A car. Black. Parked directly across the street, lights off. No movement. Her breath caught. She turned off her own lights instinctively. For several minutes she watched from behind the thin curtain. The car didn't move. She tried to tell herself it was coincidence, that Chicago had plenty of dark sedans, plenty of strangers waiting for plenty of reasons. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't coincidence. It was observation. Somewhere behind that windshield, someone was watching her, evaluating her. She moved away from the window, heart pounding. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, too exposed. In the silence, her mind replayed the night, the call, the man's voice, the driver's stare. It all connected in a slow, suffocating spiral. "Past what?" she whispered again, barely audible. No answer. Only the rain. Sleep didn't come easy. When she finally drifted off on the couch, her dreams were thick with shadows. She saw Marcello's face, though she had only seen it on the ID, calm and unreadable. His voice echoed in her head. "You didn't open it. Did you?" She woke with a jolt before dawn, drenched in sweat. The envelope was still in the drawer. She didn't need to open it to feel its weight. Morning brought gray skies and exhaustion. The diner opened at 6, but Tammy couldn't bring herself to go in early. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her reflection in her coffee mug. Her mind spun with logic and fear. If it was a test, I passed. So it's over, right? He got what he wanted. But then the questions followed. Who tested someone with thousands of dollars? Why her? And what did passing mean? That she was safe or chosen? She didn't know which possibility terrified her more. By noon, she convinced herself to return to work. The city outside had dried, leaving the streets slick and shining under weak sunlight. Everything looked normal, ordinary. Vince's diner looked the same, too. Neon lights humming, smell of bacon and burnt toast. But to Tammy, it all felt like a stage set after the actors had left. Her manager, Vince himself, grunted when she clocked in. "You look like you saw a ghost," she forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep much." "Yeah, well, you're on register today. Keep that energy up." Normal words, normal day. But the normalcy felt like a costume she couldn't fit back into. At 2:30 p.m., while refilling coffee for a couple of truckers, she caught sight of a car outside. Sleek, black, polished, parked across the street. Same car. It hadn't left. Her hand trembled, spilling coffee on the counter. Vince shot her a look. "You good?" She nodded, forcing calm. "Yeah, just hot cup." But her eyes drifted back to the window. For hours, the car stayed there, never idling, never moving, just present. When her shift ended, the sun had dipped behind gray clouds again. Tammy lingered inside long after closing, pretending to wipe tables that were already spotless. She couldn't shake the feeling that stepping outside was an invitation to something she didn't understand. Finally, near midnight, she couldn't stall any longer. She zipped her jacket, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked to the door. Her reflection in the glass looked tired. Older, maybe. As she turned the key, she caught her own whisper. "You passed." The words weren't comforting. They were chilling. Outside, the street was quiet. The car was gone. For the first time since the night before, she breathed. A shaky, uneven release. Maybe it was finally over. But when she reached her apartment, the envelope was no longer in the drawer. It was sitting on her bed, opened, the cash neatly stacked, the note placed on top. Integrity under pressure reveals character. No signature this time. Her blood turned to ice. She stepped back until her spine hit the wall. Every sound in the apartment became amplified. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the old clock, the faint murmur of rain starting again outside. She grabbed her phone to call someone. Police, a friend, anyone, but stopped. What would I even say? That a mafia boss is grading my morals? The screen went dark in her trembling hand. Outside her window, headlights flared once. A brief flash, like acknowledgement, then vanished into the night. Tammy sank to the floor, her heartbeat loud enough to drown out the storm. Whatever game she had been pulled into, she knew one thing for sure now. She hadn't passed out of danger. She had passed into it. Tammy didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, watching the door like it might swing open at any moment. The envelope's contents lay scattered across her bed, a reminder that her home wasn't hers anymore. Someone had been inside, touched her things, left a message written in calm, deliberate ink. Integrity under pressure reveals character. The words circled her mind like vultures. By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed her out, leaving only a brittle shell of alertness. She showered with the bathroom door open, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and left her apartment with the unsettling certainty that invisible eyes followed her down the stairwell. The city looked the same. Gray morning light, rush of traffic, the familiar hum of Chicago waking up. But everything felt different now. Every car that slowed near her could be watching. Every stranger's glance could mean something. She was a ghost walking through her own life. Work became unbearable. Tammy moved through her shift at the diner like a marionette with tangled strings. Orders blurred together. She burned toast twice, spilled coffee on a customer's jacket, forgot to ring up a table entirely. Vince's patience thinned with every mistake. "Robinson, what the hell is wrong with you?" he barked from behind the grill, spatula pointed like an accusation. "You've been acting weird for days now." "Sorry," she mumbled, scrubbing at a stain that wasn't there. "Just tired." "Tired don't explain looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds like someone's gonna jump you." She forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. And Vince wasn't the only one who noticed. The other waitresses whispered when she passed, quiet, speculative murmurs that stopped the moment she got too close. She caught fragments. Acting paranoid. Maybe drugs. You see her hands shaking? She wanted to scream that it wasn't paranoia when someone really was watching. But how could she explain? How could she make them understand that honesty had painted a target on her back? Between shifts, she tried to maintain her routine. Classes at the community college, studying in the library, pretending normalcy could protect her. But concentration was impossible. Every notification on her phone made her flinch. Every shadow in her peripheral vision felt deliberate. The calls started on the third day. Her phone would buzz, unknown number, and when she answered, there was only silence. Not the empty silence of a dropped call, but the breathing kind. The kind that proved someone was there, listening, measuring her fear. She stopped answering after the fifth call, but they kept coming. Sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes in the middle of the night, jolting her awake with her heart already racing. On Thursday, she found her mailbox different. The lock was new, shinier, sturdier than the rusted one that had been there for years. Her key still worked, but the change sent ice through her veins. She pulled open the small metal door with trembling fingers. Inside, a single piece of cardstock, pristine white, no address, no stamp. Just words in that same black ink. Integrity under pressure reveals character. The same message from her bedroom. Repeated. Reinforced. She crumpled it in her fist, breathing hard, and looked around the dim hallway. Empty. Silent. But she felt it. That crawling sensation of being observed even when no one was visible. They wanted her to know. Wanted her afraid. Wanted her aware that nowhere was safe. By Friday, desperation outweighed fear. Tammy walked into the 14th District Police Station during her lunch break, her resolve brittle but intact. The fluorescent lights were harsh, clinical. Officers moved past her with clipboards and coffee, their expressions tired and indifferent. She approached the front desk where a heavy-set sergeant sat behind plexiglass, barely looking up. "Can I help you?" Her mouth opened. The words were right there. "Someone's been watching me, breaking into my apartment, leaving messages. I think I'm in danger." But then Marcello's face flashed in her mind. The ID photo she'd seen, those winter storm eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone. She remembered the driver's controlled movements, the car that never left, the money that appeared like a benediction. And she remembered his name, Marcello Ossani, a name she'd stupidly Googled in a moment of reckless curiosity. The search results had been sparse, vague, but the whispers in forums and old news articles painted a picture clear enough, powerful, untouchable, dangerous. What would happen if she brought the police into this? Would they even believe her? Or worse, would they make a call, ask questions, and put her name in a file that men like Marcello could access? The sergeant raised an eyebrow. "Miss?" Tammy's throat closed. Her hands went cold. She swallowed. "Sorry. Wrong precinct." She turned and walked out before he could respond, the automatic doors hissing shut behind her like a sigh of disappointment. That night, she sat in her apartment with all the lights off, staring at the window. The exhaustion had become something else now. A kind of numbness that made her wonder if she was losing her mind. Maybe the calls were coincidence. Maybe the mailbox lock had always been new, and she'd just never noticed. Maybe the car outside was just someone who lived on her street. Maybe she was making this all up because her brain couldn't handle the alternative, that she was utterly, terrifyingly powerless. She stood and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just an inch. The street below was dark, slick with fresh rain. A few parked cars, a streetlight flickering. Nothing unusual. She was about to let the curtain fall when it happened. A flash, bright, brief, the unmistakable pop of a camera's flashbulb. It came from across the street, fourth-floor window of the building opposite hers. The light died as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by darkness. But she'd seen it. Someone had taken her picture, documented her standing there, vulnerable and alone. Tammy stumbled backward, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She yanked the curtain closed and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering so hard it hurt. They weren't just watching anymore. They were recording, proving she was theirs to monitor, to catalog, to own. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, she could do to stop it. 3 weeks passed like a slow drowning. The surveillance never stopped, just became part of her landscape. The calls, the watching, the weight of invisible chains wrapped around her daily routine. Tammy learned to function inside her fear, moving through classes and shifts like a woman underwater, every breath deliberate and heavy. Tonight, she sat in the hospital library on the 4th floor of St. Catherine's Medical Center, the teaching facility attached to her nursing program. It was nearly midnight, the building empty except for security and the occasional resident shuffling through on rounds. She preferred it this way, quiet, isolated, safe, or so she told herself. Her anatomy textbook lay open before her, pages dense with diagrams of the human cardiovascular system. She'd been staring at the same illustration for 20 minutes, seeing nothing. Her mind kept circling back to the camera flash, the crumpled notes, the reality that her life was no longer entirely her own. The library was old, dark wood shelves, brass lamps that cast warm pools of light, the smell of aged paper and floor wax. Beyond the windows, Chicago's skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent to her unraveling. She turned a page she hadn't read. That's when she felt it. A presence. Close. Behind her. Every nerve in her body locked. Her pencil froze mid-word. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with something she couldn't name. Then a voice, low and unmistakable, spoke into the silence. "You're studying the wrong system." Tammy's heart stopped. She knew that voice. She'd heard it only once, weeks ago on a phone line that changed everything. Calm, controlled, carved from winter itself. Slowly she turned. Marcello Ossani stood 3 feet away, hands in the pockets of a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire semester. He looked exactly like his ID photo. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair swept back, eyes the color of steel in low light. But the photo hadn't captured the stillness he radiated, the way his presence commanded space without effort. He didn't smile. Didn't need to. Mr. Ossani, she stammered, rising halfway before her legs remembered they didn't work properly. Sit. It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't a suggestion either. She sank back into her chair. He moved around the table with the precision of someone who always knew exactly where he was going, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting like he owned the library, the hospital, the entire goddamn city. For a long moment, he just looked at her, studying, assessing. "You didn't run," he said finally. Her throat was dry. I didn't know where to run to." "That's not why." His gaze was steady, unblinking. "You didn't run because you're not a coward, and because somewhere inside that exhausted, frightened mind of yours, you're curious." She wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that she was terrified, not curious, but the truth was sharper than she'd allowed herself to admit. He was right. Marcello reached into his jacket, she flinched, and produced a small black flip phone. He placed it on the table between them with the care of someone setting down a loaded weapon. "You've been tested, Miss Robinson. Your restraint, your honesty, your composure under pressure." His voice was silk over stone. "Most people would have kept the wallet, or panicked, or run to the police the moment they realized they were being watched. "I tried," she whispered. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed his face. "But you didn't follow through, because you're smarter than your fear." Tammy's hands trembled in her lap. "What do you want from me?" He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, fingers steepled. The gesture would have looked casual on anyone else. On him, it looked like a king granting audience. "I want to make you an offer." She waited, barely breathing. "I will fund your education. Every class, every textbook, every certification. I'll cover your rent, your expenses, your future. You'll finish your nursing degree without debt, without struggle. You'll have the life you've been fighting for." It sounded like salvation. It sounded like a trap. In exchange for what? Loyalty. Silence. And when I call, he gestured to the phone. "You answer." Her mind spun. This was insane. Impossible. Wrong. But the overdue tuition notices stacked on her counter weren't imaginary. The double shifts that left her too exhausted to study weren't a nightmare she could wake from. The dream she'd been clawing toward her entire life sat in the hands of a man who dealt in shadows and fear. "I don't understand," she said, voice breaking. "Why me?" Marcello's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, just barely, just enough to terrify her more than his coldness ever could. "Because you didn't run," he repeated. "Because when most people would have crumbled, you kept moving. You went to work, you went to class, you adapted." He paused. "I need people who don't break under pressure. And you, Miss Robinson, are stronger than you know." Tears burned behind her eyes. She didn't let them fall. "What if I say no?" "Then you say no." His voice was still calm, still measured. "The surveillance ends. You go back to your life. And we never speak again." It sounded too easy, but something in his tone suggested he already knew her answer. Because he was right, she hadn't run, and that meant something about her she wasn't ready to examine. Tammy looked at the phone, small, innocuous, a lifeline wrapped in chains. She thought about her mother's voice. "There's no peace in taking what isn't yours." But this wasn't theft. This was a trade. Her freedom for her future. Her hands moved before her mind gave permission. She reached across the table and picked up the phone. It was cold in her palm, heavier than it looked. When she raised her eyes to his, Marcello was watching her with something that might have been satisfaction, or possession. "I'll do it," she whispered. He stood, smoothing his jacket with the same precision he did everything. "Good. Someone will be in touch." He turned to leave, footsteps silent on the old library floor. "Mr. Osani." He paused, glancing back. "What happens now?" For the first time, something close to a smile touched his mouth. Brief, sharp, dangerous. "Now, Miss Robinson, you become useful." Then he was gone, swallowed by shadows and silence. Tammy sat alone in the dim library, the phone burning in her hand like a brand. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent, eternal, and somewhere in its depths, she'd just sold a piece of her soul. The changes came quietly, like snow accumulating in the night. 2 days after the library, Tammy received an email from the Northwell Medical Education Fund, a scholarship she'd never applied for. Full tuition covered, housing stipend included. The letter was professional, impersonal, stamped with a logo she couldn't find anywhere online. She knew exactly where it came from. By the end of the week, she'd quit Vince's diner. He didn't hide his irritation when she gave notice, muttering something about flaky kids who couldn't handle real work. She let him believe whatever made it easier. The truth, that she'd been bought by a man who operated in shadows, wasn't something she could speak aloud. The new apartment was in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood she'd only ever passed through on buses to campus. Third floor, corner unit, with windows that actually locked and heat that worked without coaxing. Hardwood floors. A kitchen with appliances that didn't spark. A bathroom with water pressure that didn't apologize for existing. It was beautiful. It was a cage. The money arrived every Monday. White envelopes slipped under her door while she slept, always before dawn. No postage, no return address, just crisp bills in neat stacks. Enough for groceries, books, the small luxuries she'd never allowed herself before. She tried not to think about what each envelope cost her. Tried not to calculate the price of her silence in $100 increments. The black phone sat on her kitchen table like a sleeping animal. She never touched it unless she had to, but its presence filled the apartment. Some mornings she'd wake and find herself staring at it, wondering when it would ring, what it would demand. Marcello himself remained invisible. No calls, no visits, no messages. But she felt him everywhere. In the seamless way her tuition cleared, in the apartment lease signed by a property manager who asked no questions, in the quiet efficiency of a machine that ran on his word alone. He didn't need to appear. His control was woven into the fabric of her new life. Nursing school became easier without the weight of exhaustion dragging her down. She attended lectures without nodding off. Studied without the panic of unpaid bills chewing at her focus. Her grades improved. Professors noticed. "You've really come into your own this semester, Tammy," Dr. Patel said after she aced her pharmacology exam. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." She smiled and thanked her, swallowing the bitter irony. What she was doing was being owned. But the strangest part, the part that disturbed her most in the late hours when sleep wouldn't come, was that she felt safe. The surveillance that had terrified her now felt like a strange kind of protection. The invisible eyes that watched her also meant no one else could touch her without consequence. She was property, but property had value. And value meant she mattered to someone powerful enough to make problems disappear. The dependency crept in slowly, wrapping around her ribs like vines. She hated it. And yet, some small, treacherous part of her had stopped fighting. In clinical lab on Thursday, her friend Maya pulled her aside during break. "Okay, what's going on with you?" Maya's eyes were warm but suspicious. "You quit the diner, moved to Lincoln Park, and suddenly you're not stressed about money? Did you win the lottery or something?" Tammy's throat tightened. The truth clawed at her, desperate to escape, to share the weight crushing her chest. "I made a deal with a man who could kill me with a phone call." But the words wouldn't come, because even here in the bright fluorescent safety of the hospital classroom, she could feel it. The awareness, the watching. Her eyes drifted to the windows overlooking the parking lot. A black sedan sat 3 rows back, engine off. It could have been anyone's. It wasn't. "Scholarship," she said, forcing lightness into her voice. "I got really lucky." Maya studied her for a beat too long. "You sure that's all?" "Yeah." Tammy smiled, and it felt like something cracking. "I'm sure." Maya didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. They returned to their stations, and Tammy spent the rest of class acutely aware of every word she spoke, every expression she made. The cage wasn't just her apartment. It was her entire existence. That night, she made pasta in her new kitchen. Something simple, something normal. The act of cooking in a space that didn't smell like mold and desperation should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow. She ate at the small table, the black phone resting inches from her plate. Silent. Patient. She'd almost finished when it happened. A soft buzz, low, deliberate. Her fork clattered against the bowl. The phone's screen glowed with a single message, no caller ID, just 2 words in plain text. "Be ready." Her pulse hammered. Ready for what? When? Where? She stared at the screen until it went dark again. Her appetite vanished. This was it. The price she'd agreed to without knowing the full cost. The moment the contract became real. Tammy set down her fork and pressed her palms flat against the table, steadying herself. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window, a woman she barely recognized anymore. Better dressed, better fed, better trapped. Outside, the city hummed with its usual indifference. Somewhere in its depths, Marcello Ossani was moving pieces on a board she couldn't see, and she was one of them now. She picked up the phone, holding it like a live grenade, and typed the only response that made sense. "I'm ready." The reply came instantly. Good. Nothing else. Just that single word, heavy with promise and threat. Tammy set the phone down and sat in the quiet of her beautiful cage, waiting for the world to demand its payment. The cage was disguised as security. The trap was dressed as salvation. And she'd walked into it with her eyes open, knowing exactly what it meant. That was the part that terrified her most. The phone shattered the silence at 3:45 a.m. Tammy jolted awake, heart already racing before her mind caught up. The black phone vibrated against her nightstand, its screen glowing like a tiny funeral pyre in the darkness. She grabbed it with shaking hands. "Hello? Get dressed." Marcello's voice was ice-wrapped in urgency. No greeting, no preamble. "Bring nothing. A car will be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead before she could respond. For 3 seconds, she sat frozen in her sheets, brain struggling to process. Then adrenaline kicked in like a drug. She threw off the covers and moved on autopilot. Jeans, hoodie, sneakers. Her nursing school ID hung from a lanyard on her dresser. She grabbed it out of instinct, then remembered his words. Bring nothing. She left it behind. Her hands trembled as she tied her shoes. Questions hammered at her skull. Where? Why? What had happened? But none of them mattered. The contract was clear. When he called, she answered. She was at the building's entrance in 8 minutes. At 9:30, headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness. The black sedan pulled up with predatory silence, and the back door opened like a mouth. No driver emerged. No explanation offered. Tammy climbed inside. The man behind the wheel wore a dark suit and silence like armor. He didn't look at her. Didn't speak. Just pulled into traffic and drove with the precision of someone following a route memorized bone deep. Chicago slipped past the windows, empty streets, flickering streetlights, the skeletal silhouettes of buildings against a bruised sky. They moved through the city's veins, heading north and west, away from everything familiar. Tammy's pulse hammered in her throat. She wanted to ask where they were going, what was happening, but the driver's silence was a wall she couldn't breach. 20 minutes later, they left the city limits. The landscape shifted. Fewer lights, larger properties, gates that protected secrets instead of lawns. Old money, old power. The kind of wealth that didn't advertise itself. The car turned down a private drive flanked by iron gates that opened without prompting. A sprawling mansion emerged from the darkness, stone and glass, modern and cold, lit from within by soft amber light. They pulled around to a side entrance. The driver finally spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Go inside. Second door on the left." Tammy stepped out into air that tasted like rain and copper. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them forward. The mansion's interior was sleek and silent. Marble floors, minimalist art, the kind of design that cost more than warmth. No guards visible, but she felt watched, always watched. She found the second door. It was heavy, reinforced, and opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside was a medical suite that belonged in a hospital, not a home. Stainless steel, bright surgical lights, monitors and equipment humming with quiet efficiency. And in the center, a man sprawled on a surgical table, his white dress shirt soaked crimson from shoulder to ribs. Tammy's breath caught. He was unconscious, breathing shallow and rapid. Blood pooled beneath him, dripping in slow, rhythmic taps onto the plastic-covered floor. The sharp smell of iron and fear saturated the air. A gunshot wound, upper right quadrant, still bleeding. Her nursing training kicked in before panic could, assessing, calculating, prioritizing. He needed pressure, fluids, possibly surgery if the bullet hit anything vital. "Miss Robinson." She spun. Marcello stood in the doorway, immaculate as always despite the blood spatter on his rolled shirt sleeves. His expression was composed, but something in his eyes betrayed tension, a crack in the marble facade. "Mr. Osani." "Save him." His voice was steel wrapped in command, no room for hesitation or questions. He stepped closer, and she saw it now, the barely controlled fury beneath his calm. "This is Dante. My second. He was shot during a meeting that went badly." Tammy's mind raced. She was a nursing student, not a surgeon. She'd practiced on mannequins and supervised patients, not men bleeding out from bullet wounds in a mobster's hidden medical suite. I can't." Her voice cracked. "He needs a hospital, a trauma surgeon. I'm still in school." "You're what I have." Marcello's gaze pinned her in place. "And you're what he has. So either you save him, or you watch him die." The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. Tammy looked back at Dante. Mid-30s, strong jaw, dark hair matted with sweat. Someone's brother, someone's friend, someone bleeding out because she was standing here paralyzed. Her hands stopped shaking. She crossed to the table and began snapping on gloves from a nearby supply cart. "I need you to get me towels, Celine, and someone who knows how to monitor vitals." Marcello moved immediately, no hesitation, no pride. He grabbed supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Tammy pressed gauze against the wound, her mind clearing into cold focus. The bleeding was venous, manageable if she could control it. She'd assisted in enough clinical rotations to know the basics: assess, stabilize, prevent shock. "Talk to him," she said, not looking up. "Keep him conscious if he wakes." Marcello positioned himself near Dante's head, one hand resting on his lieutenant's shoulder. For a moment, something human flickered across his face, concern, maybe even fear, before the mask returned. Tammy worked quickly, irrigating the wound, packing it, checking for exit wounds. Her hands moved with confidence she didn't feel, guided by training and desperation. The monitors beeped steady. Dante's breathing evened out. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, she stepped back, blood-soaked gloves trembling slightly. "He's stable. The bullet went through clean. No major organs hit. But he needs antibiotics, fluids, and monitoring. If infection sets in, you'll come back." Marcello's voice was quieter now, but no less absolute. She met his eyes. In them, she saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. "You just saved my family, Tammy." He used her first name deliberately, intimately. "That makes you part of it." It wasn't gratitude. It was possession. And standing there in her blood-soaked clothes, hands still shaking from adrenaline, Tammy realized the cage had just locked tighter. "His pressure's dropping." Tammy's voice cut through the sterile silence as the monitor beeped in warning. Dante's face had gone gray, his breathing shallow and labored. The initial stabilization wasn't holding. Something was wrong deeper inside. "What do you need?" Marcello's question was immediate, stripped of everything but focus. She pressed her fingers against Dante's abdomen, feeling for rigidity, internal bleeding. There. A hardness that shouldn't be there. Her stomach clenched. "Internal hemorrhaging. The bullet must have nicked something on its path through." She met Marcello's eyes. "I need to go in. Actually go in." For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered across his face. They both knew what she was saying. This wasn't field medicine anymore. This was surgery. Real surgery. the kind that required years of training she didn't have. "Then do it," he said simply. Tammy's hands trembled as she surveyed the medical suite. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls. Someone had built this room for exactly this kind of emergency. Scalpels, retractors, sutures, everything she needed and nothing that could save her if she failed. "I need you to scrub in," she said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "You're going to assist me." Marcello didn't hesitate. He moved to the sink, methodically washing his hands and forearms, while Tammy laid out instruments with shaking fingers. She'd observed dozens of surgeries during clinicals, stood beside residents and attendings, memorized procedures from textbooks. But observation and execution were oceans apart. She pulled on fresh gloves, selected a scalpel, and positioned herself over Dante's unconscious form. The weight of what she was about to do pressed against her chest like a stone. "You can do this. You have to do this." "Ready?" she asked Marcello, who stood across from her, gloved and focused. "Ready." She made the first incision. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that defied logic. Tammy worked with a precision born of desperation, her movements careful and deliberate. Blood welled up, and Marcello was there with suction before she could ask. She explored the wound cavity, fingers searching for the source of bleeding. "Retractor," she said, and it appeared in her palm instantly. "Clamp." He anticipated her needs, moving with silent efficiency. No questions, no doubt. Just absolute trust in her hands. The damage revealed itself slowly. A torn branch of the hepatic artery, bleeding steadily into Dante's abdominal cavity. Not catastrophic, but deadly if left untreated. "There," she breathed. "I see it." Her hands moved without conscious thought now, guided by months of study and the desperate need to not let this man die. She irrigated, clamped, tied off the vessel with sutures that her fingers somehow remembered how to place. Sweat dripped down her temple. Marcello reached up with sterile gauze and wiped it away without being asked, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You're doing it," he said quietly. Not encouragement. Observation. Fact. Minutes blurred into an hour. Then 2. The room became her entire universe, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the metallic scent of blood, the steady in-out of Dante's breathing. Everything else fell away. Marcello never wavered. He held retractors for 40 minutes without complaint, passed instruments with the timing of someone who'd learned to read her movements. When her hands cramped, he waited. When she needed to think, he gave her silence. They worked like parts of a single organism. Finally, impossibly, she placed the last suture in Dante's abdomen and stepped back. The monitors showed steady vitals. Strong pulse. Even breathing. The bleeding had stopped. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words falling out of her like a prayer. "Oh my God, I think—" "You did it." Marcello's voice was rough, edges worn away by hours of tension. Tammy stripped off her gloves, her hands shaking violently now that the adrenaline was crashing. She'd just performed surgery. Actual surgery. On a dining table in a mobster's mansion at 4 a.m. with nothing but nursing school training and blind terror. And Dante was alive. She stumbled slightly, lightheaded. Marcello caught her elbow, steadying her. "Sit down before you fall down," he ordered, but his tone had shifted. Something warmer underneath the command. She sank into a nearby chair, blood-stained and exhausted. Marcello moved to check Dante's vitals himself, his hand resting briefly on his lieutenant's shoulder in a gesture so human it startled her. When he turned back to Tammy, his expression had changed. The cold control had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Not quite gratitude. Too complicated for that. Respect, maybe. Recognition. He crossed to where she sat and crouched down to her eye level. His hand gripped her arm, not rough, but firm. Possessive. You just saved my family, Tammy. His voice was low, intimate. He used her first name like a claim. That makes you part of it. The words settled over her like chains made of silk. I'm not, she started, but he squeezed her arm gently, cutting her off. You are now. His eyes held hers, winter storms with something burning underneath. You held his life in your hands and didn't let go. That's more than blood. That's loyalty. She wanted to argue, to tell him she was just a nursing student who got lucky, that this didn't change anything. But they both knew it would be a lie. She'd crossed a line tonight that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd saved the life of a man who'd been shot in a world that operated outside the law. She'd worked alongside a Mafia boss with blood on both their hands. And some terrible, treacherous part of her felt alive for the first time in years. Marcello stood, releasing her arm but not his gaze. Rest here. Someone will drive you home at dawn. He moved toward the door, then paused. Tammy? She looked up, exhausted and wired and fundamentally changed. Thank you. The words were simple, but coming from him, they felt like a coronation. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with Dante's steady breathing and the knowledge that she belonged to something dark and inescapable now. The cage had become a throne, and she couldn't tell anymore which terrified her more. Tammy woke to unfamiliar softness, Egyptian cotton sheets. Down pillows that cradled her head like clouds. Morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting the room in gold. For a disoriented moment, she thought she'd dreamed everything. The call, the blood, the impossible surgery. Then she saw her hands, scrubbed clean, but the memory of blood stained them still. Her clothes from last night sat folded on a nearby chair, the hoodie still marked with rust-colored evidence of what she'd done. This wasn't her apartment. This was a guest suite, all cream and champagne tones, minimalist luxury, the kind of room designed to make you forget you were a prisoner. She sat up slowly, muscles aching from hours of standing over the surgical table. A glass of water and 2 painkillers waited on the nightstand beside a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. Rest. You've earned it. M. The door was closed, but not locked. When she tested the handle, it opened onto a hallway lined with more closed doors and the distant murmur of voices. Masculine. Professional. Guards, probably. She was still in the mansion, still in his world. She found her way to the ensuite bathroom, all marble and chrome, and showered until the water ran cold. Watching blood swirl down the drain, she tried to process what had happened. She'd saved a man's life, performed surgery beyond her training, crossed every ethical line her professors had warned her about, and survived. When she emerged wrapped in a plush robe that wasn't hers, Marcello was sitting in the armchair by the window. She froze. He looked different in daylight. Less like a shadowy crime lord, more like a man. Still impeccably dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal Henley, but relaxed. Almost casual. A tablet rested in his lap, steam rising from a coffee cup on the side table. I knocked, he said without looking up. You didn't answer. I was in the shower. Her voice came out steadier than expected. I'm aware. He finally raised his eyes and something flickered there. Amusement, maybe. There are clothes in the closet. Your size. Of course he knew her size. He probably knew her blood type, her social security number, every secret she'd ever kept. She crossed to the closet and found a selection that looked like it came from a personal shopper. Simple, expensive, perfectly her taste. She dressed quickly in dark jeans and a soft sweater, hyper-aware of his presence in the next room. When she returned, he'd poured her coffee. Black, 1 sugar, exactly how she took it. The attention to detail should have terrified her. Instead, It felt oddly intimate. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. She obeyed, taking the coffee with both hands. The warmth helped ground her. "How's Dante?" "Stable, awake, already complaining." A ghost of a smile touched Marcello's mouth. "You gave him a second chance at life. He won't forget that. Neither will I." Tammy stared into her coffee. "I just did what anyone would." "No." The word cut sharp and final. "You did what most wouldn't, under pressure that would have broken someone twice your age." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what that means to me? To my family?" She met his gaze. "That I'm useful. That you're trusted." He let the distinction settle between them. "In my world, trust is currency." "You just became very wealthy." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. This was more than gratitude. It was adoption. She'd been drafted into something she couldn't fully see yet. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" Marcello set down his tablet, giving her his full attention. "Now you finish your degree. You live your life. And when I need you, when my family needs you, you come. That's it. That's everything." His eyes held hers. "I don't deal in half measures, Tammy. You're either out completely, or you're in all the way. Last night, you chose." Had she? Or had desperation chosen for her? "What if I want out?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He didn't flinch, didn't threaten, just regarded her with something that looked almost like understanding. "Then you walk away. Today. Now. I'll have someone drive you home. The scholarship continues. Consider it payment for services rendered. You'll never hear from me again." The offer hung in the air, too easy, too clean. "But," she prompted, "but you won't." Not arrogance, certainty. Because last night, you found something you've been searching for your whole life. "What's that?" "Purpose." He said it simply, like revealing a truth she'd hidden from herself. "You weren't just saving a life. You were proving you're capable of more than serving coffee and chasing impossible dreams. You were necessary." The words struck deeper than they should have, because he was right. Standing over that table, hands covered in blood, every decision life or death, she'd felt more real than any day at the diner, any lecture hall, any moment of her carefully planned, desperately maintained existence. She'd felt powerful. "You see it now," Marcello observed, reading her expression. "The difference between surviving and mattering." Tammy's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "You're a criminal." "I'm a businessman operating in gray markets." His tone didn't change. "I have a code. I protect my people. I keep my word. And I don't pretend the world is fair or just. I just navigate it honestly." "Honestly?" She almost laughed. "You run the Mafia." "I run a family that survives in a system designed to crush people like us." For the first time, something raw entered his voice. "My father was killed by men who smiled while they shook his hand. My mother died because we couldn't afford the medicine that might have saved her. I learned early. The world has rules for them and rules for us. So I made my own." The glimpse beneath his armor stunned her. This wasn't a monster, it was a man shaped by violence and loss into something harder, sharper, something that bent the world rather than breaking under it. And God help her, she understood. "You're lonely," she said softly, surprising them both. Marcello's expression shuddered immediately, but not before she saw it. The flicker of recognition, quickly buried. "Loneliness is the price of power," he said finally. "I've made peace with it." "Have you?" They stared at each other across the small table, the air thick with things neither could say. Dangerous things. Forbidden things. He stood abruptly. Rest today. Someone will drive you home this evening. And Tammy? She looked up. Thank you. Truly. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her coffee and the disturbing realization that she didn't want to leave. That night, back in her apartment, Tammy sat at her kitchen table. The black phone rested under her palm. Before, it had felt like a leash. Now it felt like a lifeline. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. No new messages, just the weight of connection to something bigger, darker, more real than anything she'd known. She set it down gently, deliberately, within reach. Not with dread anymore, with acceptance, maybe even anticipation. 3 weeks passed like a held breath. Tammy returned to her classes, her routines, the careful architecture of normalcy she'd built. But nothing fit anymore. She sat through lectures on pharmacology and patient care, took notes in neat handwriting, smiled at Maya's jokes in the cafeteria, all the while feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. The other students complained about exams and clinical rotations. She nodded along, remembering the weight of a scalpel in her hand, the metallic smell of blood, the impossible pressure of holding death at bay with nothing but knowledge and nerve. They were playing at medicine. She had been medicine, raw and desperate and real. The phone sat silent on her nightstand, waiting, patient as a predator. She checked it obsessively, morning, noon, night, some part of her craving the disruption even as she dreaded it. The scholarship money arrived every Monday like clockwork. Her apartment remained pristine, untouched. No surveillance she could detect, though she knew better than to believe she was unwatched. Marcello had vanished back into whatever shadows he inhabited, leaving only absence and the echo of his voice. You're part of this now. She tried to convince herself she was free, that the debt was paid, the test passed, the door closed. But freedom had never felt this much like waiting. The call came on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks and 2 days after Dante's surgery. Tammy was studying at her kitchen table, highlighter in hand, when the phone buzzed. Her heart seized before she even looked at the screen. Unknown number. But she knew. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Miss Robinson. Marcello's voice was colder than she remembered. Professional, distant. The warmth from their morning conversation had evaporated, replaced by something harder. I need you tonight. Not a request. An invocation of the contract she'd signed in blood and silence. What happened? She asked, already standing, already moving toward her closet. A complication. Nothing like last time. A pause, weighted with meaning. This one requires discretion more than skill. Can you be ready in 15 minutes? Her pulse hammered. Different than last time. What did that mean? Yes. Good. The car is already outside. The line went dead. Tammy stood frozen for a moment, phone pressed to her ear like she could extract more information from the silence. Then training took over. She dressed quickly. Dark jeans, black jacket, hair pulled back. Professional. Invisible. When she reached the street, the black SUV idled at the curb like it had never left. The drive was longer this time, deeper into territories she didn't recognize. Industrial areas giving way to abandoned warehouses, then to a neighborhood that felt deliberately forgotten. The kind of place where questions died before they could be asked. The driver, a different man, broader, quieter, said nothing. Just drove with the same mechanical precision they all seemed to possess. They stopped in front of a nondescript building, windows dark, no signs of life. He opened her door and gestured toward a side entrance. Second floor, room 2B, He's expecting you. Tammy stepped into the cold night air, her breath misting. The building loomed above her, all concrete and shadows. Inside, the stairwell smelled of rust and neglect. Her footsteps echoed too loud, each one a countdown to something she couldn't name. Room 2B. She knocked once. Enter. Marcello stood in the center of a sparse room, bare concrete floor, a single metal table, industrial lighting that cast harsh shadows. And on the table, strapped down and unconscious, was a man she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, expensive suit now torn and bloodied, face swollen from recent violence. But he was breathing. Stable. Her medical assessment happened automatically, even as her mind struggled to catch up. What? Morphine, Marcello interrupted, handing her a sealed vial and syringe. Enough to keep him sedated for 6 hours, no more, no less. She stared at the medication, then at the restrained man. Who is he? Someone who betrayed people I care about. Marcello's voice was flat, factual. Someone who needs to remain manageable until morning. Understanding dawned cold and terrible. This wasn't emergency medicine. This was facilitation. She wasn't here to save a life. She was here to maintain one just long enough for whatever came next. Her hands didn't reach for the vial. You want me to sedate him so you can... She couldn't finish the sentence. So I can have a conversation. Marcello's eyes met hers, and there was no apology in them, no shame. A long, detailed conversation about choices and consequences. But I need him calm, cooperative. That's where you come in. I'm not... Her voice cracked. I'm a nurse. I save lives, I don't... You're my nurse. The possessive struck like a blade. You save the lives I tell you to save. You ensure the comfort of those I need comfortable. That was always the deal, Tammy. You just didn't want to see it clearly. The room felt too small suddenly, airless. She looked at the sedated man again. Betrayer or not, he was human. And she was being asked to make him vulnerable to whatever Marcello had planned. You proved your hands can save, Marcello said quietly, stepping closer. Now I'll see if your heart can obey. The words from weeks ago echoed back. You're either out completely, or you're in all the way. She'd thought saving Dante was the test, but that had only been the beginning, proving she had the skill. This was different. This was proving she had the loyalty, the willingness to use her knowledge not just for life, but for his purposes, whatever they might be. Her hand trembled as she reached for the vial. Marcello watched her, expression unreadable. You can walk away, right now. The offer still stands. Could she? Could she really go back to her apartment, her classes, her small, safe life, knowing what she'd seen? Knowing she'd be looking over her shoulder forever, waiting for the moment someone decided she knew too much? Or worse, could she live with the hollowness of returning to a world that suddenly felt colorless and small? She broke the seal on the vial. How much does he weigh? Her voice was steady, professional. Marcello's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction. Possession. 90 kilos, give or take. She calculated the dosage with mechanical precision, drew it up, approached the table. The man's breathing was even, his face peaceful despite the bruising. She wondered what he'd done, if he had family, if anyone would miss him. Then she stopped wondering and administered the injection. When it was done, she stepped back, empty syringe in hand. 6 hours, she said flatly. Thank you. Marcello's gratitude sounded genuine, almost gentle. She couldn't look at him, couldn't look at the man on the table, could only stare at her own hands, steady, capable, now complicit in something she couldn't name. The drive back was silent. Tammy stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Somewhere behind them, Marcello was having his conversation. Somewhere ahead, her apartment waited, clean and safe and paid for with blood money and moral compromise. She'd thought the wallet was the test, then the surgery. But she understood now. There was no final test, no moment of passing that would grant her freedom. Every choice was a test. Every call would demand more. The price of passing was never stopping. Back in her apartment, Tammy stood before the bathroom mirror in the dark. The woman who stared back looked the same. Same tired eyes, same small frame, same face her mother would recognize. But something behind the eyes had changed, hardened, adapted. She was still a nurse, still a healer, but she was also something else now, something without a name in the medical textbooks. She touched her reflection, fingertips meeting cold glass. "Who are you?" she whispered. The mirror offered no answers. Behind her, through the window, she could see the street below. And there, parked beneath the streetlight, a black SUV idled in the darkness. Not threatening, just present. A reminder that she was never truly alone, never truly free. She turned off the bathroom light and walked to her bed. The phone sat on her nightstand, dark and patient. She didn't check for messages, didn't need to. They would come when he needed her, and she would answer. Because the test had never ended. It had only evolved. And somewhere in the twisted currency of loyalty and survival, she'd stopped being Tammy Robinson, the waitress who dreamed of saving lives. She'd become something far more dangerous. Someone who could save them, or help end them, whatever Marcello Ossani required. The cage had become a throne. The throne had become a gallows, and she stood upon it, knowing there was no climbing down. What did you think of Marcello and Tammy's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this one? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.